I'd like to pass it along to Daniel Parr to introduce our event for today. He is the president of the board of directors for the Saskatchewan Arts Alliance.
Thank you very much, Em, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I would like to begin by acknowledging the people who came before us on this land and all of the knowledge that has been passed down. Since time immemorial, this land has been called home by the Nehiyawak, Nakawinawak, Dakota, and Lakota, and Dene Sioux Lene people, and is the traditional homeland of the Métis. By honoring the land, we acknowledge the teachings and wisdoms gained by the peoples past and bring that knowledge into the present and future. I want to thank everybody for being with us today. It's a chilly afternoon on a long weekend, but our panelists are going to keep you warm and engaged all afternoon. In terms of housekeeping, this event is being recorded. Please leave your microphones off, but if you feel comfortable having your camera on, you're welcome to do so. There will be a Q&A for Shannon and the panelists. We do welcome questions, but they may come at the end. But please feel free to have any questions in the chat. If you're having any technical issues, you may also post in the chat and someone from the SAA will do our best to assist you. I would like to thank our funders for this event, Saskatchewan Arts, Sask Lotteries, Sask Culture, and MyTax. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Shannon Litzenberger. We will be having a panel on the unique roles of artists have to play at this moment in time of re-emergence and social transformation. It will explore the precarious state of the how and how we might disentangle ourselves from an old system in order to create a new one. And Shannon Litzenberger is going to be presenting her essay and then moderating a panel. Shannon Litzenberger is an award-winning dance artist, embodiment facilitator, and experienced cultural leader working at the intersection of art, ideas, and transformational change. As a dancer and performance maker, her work explores our relationship to land, the politics of belonging, and the forgotten wisdom of the body. She has an incredible array of achievements, which I invite you to take a look at. I've posted a link to Shannon's website in the chat. So if you have a moment, please do take a look at that. And Shannon also wanted us to let you know that she's from Saskatchewan and grew up in the Yorkton-Melville area. So welcome home, so to speak. Shannon?
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's really a pleasure to be here. And thank you also to Em and Jessica and the Saskatchewan Arts Alliance for putting this event together and for inviting me here today as your moderator for this session. As Daniel mentioned, I am a dance artist, choreographer, director, embodiment facilitator, and also someone who thinks quite frequently about the larger systems that organize our society and our field. And yes, I grew up in Saskatchewan. I still have roots at my family farm near Melville and have been spending more time there lately, actually just as a way of reconnecting with the place that shaped me. So since the pandemic hit, I have been thinking very deeply about the state of the arts and maybe more specifically about the state of artists. And I have been feeling quite frustrated by the ways that emergency supports in our field have been deployed disproportionately to organizations and that those supports are not trickling down to artists. And I am concerned that the voices and experiences of artists are not always being heard or sought out in conversations about policy or systemic change. And I'm also particularly worried about the well-being of artists right now. And so I've put some of that reflection into writing in the form of an essay that I'm quite excited to share with you today. It's been very much a labor of love, unsponsored by any organization or institution. But I wrote it in the hopes that my perspective as an artist on the current crisis might feel resonant for other artists out there who still need to give voice to their experiences in this time of great disruption. So the essay consists of 4 parts. First, the alienated state of the artist, an emergency and a revolution in the making. Second, from culture as a colonial project to culture as a lever for change. Third, artists as world makers. And fourth, from emergency to emergence, detaching from the current system to build the next one. And I'm joined today by an incredible group of Saskatchewan-based artists who will add their voices and experiences to this conversation. Kris Alvarez, Erica Violet Lee, and Yvette Nolan, who will introduce themselves a little bit later, have already had an opportunity to reflect on the themes of the essay. And so we will hear from them during the second half of the session. And there'll also be an opportunity, as Daniel mentioned, for questions from all of you. And really my hope is that we can sort of shift into a more conversational mode of exchange. I know the Zoom platform can feel very presentational, and so we will do our best. I will do my best to transcend some of those performative dynamics here. But thank you for being here. And I'll just say, as I share this essay with you, I'd like to invite you to use the chat to echo anything that is resonant for you. I'm not going to monitor the chat as I share the essay until we shift into the dialogue portion, but feel free to use it now as a proxy for shared experience. And alternatively, you might choose to simply listen. And if you don't need to make use of the ASL interpretation service, you might also just allow yourself to disengage from the screen and feel the impact of this text in your heart and your gut, as well as your mind. And feel free to walk around and to look around from time to time. You could gaze onto a longer horizon. Okay. Here we go.
Switch. Okay, just give me a moment. We're going to switch to Rachel.
Introduction. One artist's perspective on the current crisis.
We switch interpreter to Rachel. Oh, got it. Okay, thank you.
The neon sign erected by the pandemic reads, "Change or perish." If we take the imperative of social transformation seriously, then we understand that we are living in a time between worlds. Our sector was devastated by the pandemic, and we are facing a moment of reckoning where we need to examine the ways that we organize our systems of cultural production. This is not just about updating the policies that govern us and redistributing the resources that enable our work, but also about the culture we embody in our field. Recalibration of the former will have limited impact without the latter. We must disrupt the behaviors and practices that perpetuate the system as it was designed. As vaccination rates climb, restrictions are lifted, and we are allowed once again to stage our plays, mount our choreographies, host our galas, and open our exhibitions. How will we avoid sliding back into the habits of a world we know is oppressive, inequitable, and unsustainable? As a community of culture makers, how do we work at the level of culture change as a priority in order to fully embody the world we aspire to? These questions have been at the center of my own pandemic-inspired reflections. As a practicing dance artist, embodiment facilitator, change maker, policy thinker, and longtime arts advocate, I am invested in the role artists have to play in this moment of re-emergence and social transformation. I believe that artists are world makers and that this work is critical right now. I also believe that artists are not adequately centered or supported in the professional arts ecosystem, nor have they been ambitiously mobilized as change agents during this time of crisis, much to the detriment of the arts and culture sector and to society at large. My response to this dilemma is a call for radical experimentation, both to artists and to those who make decisions about the systems that organize our work. Part 1. The alienated state of the artist, an emergency and a revolution in the making. The role of the artist is that of the soldier of the revolution, Diego Rivera. The experience we are living through is simultaneously an emergency and a revolution in the making. While these phenomena often go hand in hand, they create a contradiction in the way that we as individuals and as a society might respond. In an emergency, our nature is to stabilize, to mitigate damage, to prioritize survival. But in a revolution, We mobilize, we disrupt, and we set fire to the establishment. While governments, businesses, and many public service organizations continue to lead emergency response strategies, many artists are at the center of the activism and community organizing that is fueling a revolution. Here, we find ourselves in a moment of paradox, where the systems are trying to preserve themselves, while artists are joining a mounting resistance. It may seem contradictory, but there is a reason that emergency and emergence share an etymological root. It means to rise, to bring to light. What if this paradox is exactly the alchemy that could bring about the social transformation we so desperately need? What would it mean for a society to offer its artists the agency, resources, and support they need to do their work well and fully, and with the aim of catalyzing transformative change? Well, first, we might start by expanding our view beyond the notion that artists are creative unicorns, here to entertain, distract, and comfort us, as popular media has suggested throughout the pandemic. While comfort, distraction, and entertainment have been the emotional crutches of too many months in lockdown, the work of artists is much more fundamental in this moment. The role of the artist in a time of transition is most essentially one of catalyzing emergence. The processes inherent in art making are essential right now because we are in a moment where an old world is collapsing and a new world has yet to emerge. We need people who are practiced in the art of working collaboratively and across differences in highly volatile conditions, able to venture into the unknown with the aim of creation. Cycles of history tell us that artists have always been at the forefront in moments of social transformation. In her book, Funny Weather, Art in an Emergency, author Olivia Lang wrote that art shapes our ethical landscapes. It opens us to the interior lives of others. It is a training ground for possibility. It makes plain inequalities, and it offers other ways of living. Art is a process of transformation concerned with human development. Art thrives in the what if questions and relishes the learning of each experiment. Art is both a barometer and a process of social transformation. As we consider the potential role of artists as agents of change, as healers, as animators of the public imagination, as world makers, can we first turn our gaze towards the experience of artists inside this moment of great disruption? How are artists doing right now? Are they thriving? Are they being ambitiously mobilized to do their most essential work? It is an understatement to say that the pandemic has been devastating for the arts, though it has been particularly ruinous for artists. Through the pandemic, emergency response strategies in the arts have deployed ample resources to institutions and organizations to ensure their survival. But what about the survival of artists? Here's a snapshot of artists during the pandemic. 62% of artists reported high levels of stress or total burnout. Artists lost an average of 36 opportunities amounting to $25,000 of income. 63% of all cultural workers accessed CERB, and for many artists I know, this was a more stable and significant income than in pre-pandemic times. In Saskatchewan, 67% of artists had been impacted financially due to the cancellation of events. 55% have experienced the loss of salary, fees, or contracts in their primary arts disciplines, and nearly half had depleted savings or investments. But even before the pandemic, artists were so poorly compensated that pursuing a career in the arts hasn't been viable or sustainable without significant financial subsidization for quite some time. Artists are the worst compensated workers in their field, regularly exploited economically, to help keep the engine of the arts and culture sector running. In 2016, the median income of artists was 44% lower than the median income of all Canadian workers, while cultural workers in general have median incomes much closer to the Canadian norm at just 6% lower than all workers. I live in Toronto, where 69% of artists make less than Toronto's living wage of $45,000 per year, and half make less than $30,000, according to Toronto Art Stats from 2019. While $45,000 is the benchmark for a living wage in Toronto, the typical person needs more like $69,500 in income to afford to rent a one-bedroom apartment in the city. 72% of us work on freelance or contract basis and have incomes from multiple arts-related sources. To make ends meet, we also have additional part or full-time jobs within and in growing numbers outside the arts. We are overworked, and we no longer believe we can survive here, and so we are leaving the city. Like me, 69% of artists moved to Toronto to pursue their careers, while only 28% were born here. The need to work in proximity to robust arts markets in community with fellow arts professionals is, for many, outweighed by a need to survive, to pay rent, to buy groceries. Anecdotally, we know that artists are also leaving the field altogether. In his new book, The Death of the Artist, essayist and critic William Dershowitz deftly describes several evolving market conditions that have adversely impacted artists in North American society. First, thanks to monopolizing tech companies, vast amounts of profits have been redirected away from creators to distributors, leaving artists chronically underpaid for their work, even at considerable scale. More nefariously, art in the digital age has been steadily demonetized, expected for free, or at shockingly low cost. So how do we reconcile this expectation with the call to ramp up the creation and dissemination of digital content? Second, artists work for free behind the scenes in order to access the limited and mostly underpaid opportunities offered to them in the arts marketplace. Artists know they must appeal to the gatekeepers of the art world, capable of making them stand out in an oversaturated attention economy. Funders, presenters, curators, and programmers all deploy resources, space, money, access to audiences in support of the artist's work. Gaining access to these resources requires an enormous investment of time and labor while producing painfully low rates of return. Having a career as an artist has become as laborious as running a small, under-resourced arts organization, but with fewer resources. Artists are working for free, sourcing opportunities, writing proposals, self-promoting, networking with presenters, producers, gallerists, and publishers, and more. And this is to say nothing of ongoing training, finding ways to stay creatively inspired, and time for unstructured, open-ended imagining. Finally, the often hidden truth Dershowitz makes explicit is that economic advantages within the system are essential for professional viability, let alone success. Advantages like spousal or family support means spending more time on pursuing art and less on other activities required for survival. Having privileged access to donor networks, promoters, producers, and other market gatekeepers also improves the likelihood of standing out in the crowd. These advantages significantly increase the potential for professional viability, and these are class-based privileges with implications that cut across dimensions of social location. Given these realities, Canadian artists and many of their supporters are advocating for a guaranteed basic income. How else to level the playing field inside an industry so deeply entrenched in the dynamics of neoliberal capitalism and its inherent inequities? But let's be clear that the call to arms for social relief for artists is only made necessary by the way the system is exploiting them to begin with. In the same way that late-stage capitalism is amplifying wealth inequality and therefore heightening the demand for social supports across many facets of society, the guaranteed basic income for artists is necessary because our system of cultural production has so significantly eroded the value of the arts and disabled the artist's ability to make a livable income in this system. The precarious economic situation of the artist is very much putting at stake the ability of the arts to retain its independence and freely express its truth. What then is at stake for a society when artists are no longer able to freely express their truths? What happens when artists no longer have the time to steep themselves in imagination, when they are too mired in trying to stay afloat economically to ever contemplate, reflect, experiment, and allow for newness to emerge? One of the greatest challenges artists face at this moment is that the industry we work in is steeped in the rules, dynamics, and cultural norms that we are seeking to disrupt. Our near impossible task is to disentangle ourselves from a worldview that celebrates the individual over the collective, that chases production, progress, and economic growth at the expense of human and planetary health, that uses power as a form of dominance and control instead of as an abundant resource of fuel that catalyzes our individual and collective ability to achieve purpose, and that commodifies every gift of our shared existence, from the water we drink to our time, attention, and labor. In this world, art as a way of knowing is devalued. Art as a process of imagining new worlds is relegated to the realm of entertainment and distraction. Artists are reduced to producers of commodities invested in by governments to fuel economic development. And if we as a culture sector don't experiment radically with ways of disrupting this worldview, we will inevitably continue to propagate it. Part 2. From culture as a colonial project to culture as a lever for change.
I could just get you to
Mr.
switch
Brandy?
the interpreters, please. We're going to switch to Brandy, please.
Decolonization is presencing what is absent. Mulaney Goodchild. Developing Canada's nationhood through a robust government-sponsored system of cultural production has been a highly effective strategy of the colonial project. The Massey Commission of the 1950s gave birth to a Canadian culture distinct from our American neighbors and reflective of Canada's British and French colonial roots. Today, we can look back on a considerable legacy of national cultural institutions, Canadian-made artwork, and Canadian art heroes seeded and nurtured by the state. The truth of this legacy, however, the legacy of the nation we call Canada, is that it came at an unconscionable cost to human life and dignity. In the name of creating a national culture, Canada was simultaneously enacting a cultural genocide. The systematic erasure of Indigenous peoples, along with their cultures and languages, is a shameful and devastating part of our legacy of nation building, as is the enslavement of Black peoples, the subjugation of Japanese, Chinese, and South Asian populations through indentured labor, and the oppression of Jewish and other ethnic minority peoples and cultures. At this moment, we must face the appalling truth about the process of creation that made Canada, a process that enacted egregious atrocities against human life. Today, in this increasingly pluralistic, post-nationalist society colonially known as Canada, it is essential that Canada support cultural sovereignty for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We must honor the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action as well as the recommendations for justice in the report on missing and murdered Indigenous women. The work of cultural transformation cannot begin without it. To build a new foundation of cultural democracy for a future Canada, we must reimagine cultural policies in support of a more pluralistic expression of sociocultural contexts that we share. To do this, we simply cannot continue to privilege classical Eurocentric art aesthetics by disproportionately distributing funds to the large institutions that promote them. Art forms like ballet, opera, classical music, and a historical canon of European visual art certainly have a place in the Canadian cultural landscape. Their state-sponsored dominance, however, can no longer be justified. The fact that these institutions are frequented primarily by affluent patrons, receive annual government grants and private donations totaling in the millions each year, benefit uniquely from taxpayer-matched endowment funds, and operate at a scale exponentially greater than most others in the field, is impossible to reconcile with the imperative of building a cultural democracy. While these institutions consume the lion's share of resources, the rest of us, working across a broad range of cultural forms and practices, collectively reaching a highly diverse group of people and communities, remain relegated to the grassroots battlegrounds. Here we work in a domain of highly competitive all-or-nothing project funding, micro-granting, and GoFundMe campaigns. While some organizations do occupy a more comfortable middle ground with regular and predictable government funding, they also struggle to fulfill an essential bridging role across a widening gap in the so-called ecosystem between the best and the worst resourced players. In many cases, these mid-scale organizations are the pseudo-institutions of a particular cultural context or form of practice, playing a critical role within the field that extends beyond a typical creation and production mandate. While disheartening, this should be no surprise, because Canada's cultural policies were never designed to reflect the contexts or processes of a wide range of cultural expressions present in our country's diversifying population. Significant historical inequities remain, despite the ways in which policies have shifted incrementally over time to include support for a more diverse palette of cultural expression. The multicultural society proposed by Canada's expanded cultural policy project is still very much imbued with the features and organizing principles of colonialism. It has been a project of othering, where a dominant Eurocentric culture retains its centrality. Decades of advocacy efforts on the part of under-supported artists and equity-seeking groups continue today under the banner of sovereignty, anti-oppression, anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. However, diverse human and cultural identities simply represented within a colonial white supremacist heteropatriarchal system risk being exotified, tokenized, and co-opted to further the original aims of the colonial project. Representation within the system as it was designed risks producing the same old outcomes. It's the very design of the system that we need to concern ourselves with. To design a more just system, one that more equally distributes the benefits and burdens it produces, we can't simply recalibrate an old system to become more fair and efficient, nor can we simply reorganize the distribution of power along identity lines, maintaining the existing architecture. We need to engage in a more fundamental process of creation, organized around principles of cultural plurality, equity and justice, sustainability, creative engagement, collective care and well-being, and others. Radical disruption in the arts means reevaluating things like standards of artistic excellence, as well as metrics of public value and economic viability. It means unpacking the implicit biases hidden underneath notions of talent and merit. It means challenging hierarchies and reorganizing power structures so that shifts in policy and resource distribution can be informed by a plurality of cultural experiences and aesthetics. This is how we start to move out of the house that modernity built. In recent years, there has been a growing attention to the imperative of updating Canada's cultural policy framework by replacing the outdated narratives of the 70-year-old Massey Levesque report. Indeed, reimagining the rules of the system and the ways in which those rules govern the distribution of coveted resources is critical, but only part of the equation. What must be disrupted are the patterns of behavior the current system has conditioned. We in the arts embody the rules and dynamics we have been shaped by. We have been enculturated by this system, and our most challenging project is to disentangle ourselves from the habits of being this system has shaped us to carry out. To let go of the habits that reify and perpetuate the old system and embrace ways of being that will shape a future world, we need to heal, learn, experiment, and practice. While policies and resources make change possible, practice is what makes change sustainable. The global social justice movement that was amplified following the murder of George Floyd in the US on May 25, 2020, has accelerated the urgency to create a new social contract that addresses the pervasiveness of racism and other social inequities woven through our social fabric. In Canada, the legacies of colonization are unfolding still today. And if we weren't aware before, the pandemic has shed light on any lingering ignorance, a health crisis, a policing crisis, a housing crisis, an economic crisis, a crisis of well-being, a crisis of spirit, a crisis of care. The need for a revolution couldn't be more of an emergency. In the arts, the call for a cultural transformation built on the momentum of the Idle No More, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and Indigenous resurgence movements has helped to center and lift up the work of women, Indigenous, Black, people of color, and other equity-seeking artists. However, it's important to acknowledge that for those in power, equity-seeking artists and their work have also become a new kind of cultural capital, ready to be leveraged through very fresh diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. This might be a step toward the kind of long-term transformative change we are seeking if it manages to resist becoming a passing fad, acting as a kind of public relations campaign in a moment of social justice consciousness. The work of building a culture liberated from the historical colonial ethos Canada is embedded in is a project for a generation or more. It involves working at the levels of self, structure, system, and culture. It involves visioning a cultural democracy capable of reflecting a culturally pluralistic citizenry in a post-colonial society. For many arts organizations, the work of dismantling systems of oppression has only just begun. Relationships that bridge class and power divides are nascent, as are collective learning processes focused on embodying more inclusive, equitable cultures. Institutions will not likely lead the way toward the new world because of how entangled they are in the dynamics of the world that made them. The pursuit of reconciling historical inequities through diversified representation and policy reform has been a focus for many arts organizations through the pandemic. This alone will be a failing strategy for our sector if the goal is long-term systemic change. Elizabeth Dory Tunstall, Dean of Design at OCAD-U, made this case elegantly in her keynote address at the Cultural Pluralism in the Arts Movement Ontario's May 2021 Gathering Divergence Festival. As the first ever in the world Black female design school dean, she referred to herself as a super token, invited as a Black woman into a dominantly white institution. Diversity, she says, is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being invited to dance the dances the host knows, the foxtrot, the waltz. Equity is to make room for the dances she knows and to make dancing them a part of the culture that all members of the institution participate in. What her metaphor illustrates is that requesting better representation in a system designed to enact the same dynamics of oppression inherent in a wider system of heteropatriarchal white supremacy is an incomplete recipe for change. And in fact, becoming a super token inside organizations where real cultural shifts are not consciously in progress, leaders of color and other equity-seeking individuals may find themselves more subjected to harm than empowered to lead change within the dynamics of elite social control so deeply embedded in the governance of the arts industry and its institutions. This was plainly evident throughout the aforementioned festival, where many Black artists and arts administrators spoke of these challenges. To really do the work of the revolution, we need to look beyond strategies of diversified representation and policy reform and work at the level of culture. We need to reshape our ways of being together across our differences, divesting ourselves of the human hierarchy so present in our society. Rizma Menachem, healer, best-selling author, and trauma specialist, reminds us that because culture lives in our bodies, cultural practice trumps all things cognitive, ideas, philosophies, convictions, principles, and laws. To work at the level of culture, we need to engage in embodied creative processes that work with the materials of meaning-making, rituals and symbols, codes of behavior, communal language and storytelling, rules of belonging. Working with such materials within the conditions we find ourselves in of chaos, complexity, and constraint help us expand into new possibilities. This is the work of the artist. Through the transformative power of their creative practices, artists are especially and uniquely capable of catalyzing the kind of systems change we need right now by leading at the level of culture change. To do this well, artists need to uncouple themselves from the concepts, structures, and dynamics that are producing current systemic harms. Liberating ourselves from a system of oppression that we periodically benefit from is a significant act of resistance. And it is particularly difficult to enact, either because of how precarious our professional artistic lives are to begin with, or because of our relative privilege within it. We rely on every and any small benefit afforded to us by the system. We work ourselves regularly into states of burnout. We never say no because we can't. We focus on artistic activities that have the best chance of being funded and promoted. We hang on tightly to the belief that over time it will get better and maybe even a little easier, but it doesn't. The return on our emotional, spiritual, and creative investment is shockingly unacceptable. To transcend these dynamics, where we artists are too often exploited in our own industry, we will need to experiment with new ways of working that are better aligned with the world we want to live in. Part 3, artists as world makers.
We can switch to Sue, interpreter.
Art is an effort to create, beside the real world, a more humane world. André Marois. To reimagine Canadian culture, what I'm proposing is the centering of the individual artist and their honed ability to experiment with emergent artistic practice as an organizing strategy during this transitional time between worlds. Returning to my earlier question, if artists were offered the agency, resources, and support to engage fully in the transformative potential of their creative practice, could they lead the way toward a new world? If we put more of our attention on individual artists concerned with emergence and less on the system concerned with the emergency, could we better catalyze change? Artistic process is, by its very nature, emergent. It is a process capable of world making because it explores horizons of possibility in ways that engage our fully embodied sensory capacities, including our imagination. Creation processes value integrated forms of knowledge production, including intuition, perception, and emotion, in addition to conceptual thought. As such, these are processes capable of working on our ways of being, as well as on our ways of thinking and doing, all within the volatile conditions we find ourselves in, those of complexity, disconnection, and uncertainty. Processes that prioritize felt sense experience have been increasingly subjugated by our hyper-rational, data-driven culture of information overload. As such, they feel less and less familiar in our society as processes that support our collective evolution. However, these processes are integral to the creation of meaning, which in turn catalyzes change. As Seth Godin put it in his 2015 audiobook, Leap First, Creating Work That Matters, to create meaning is to change something for the better. A meaningful artistic experience can move us toward new understanding, engagement, and action. Because of our practiced ability to create meaning, we artists can, and often do, disrupt old interpretations of a shared reality. We tell new stories, offer up new metaphors, and resituate familiar ideas in unfamiliar contexts. Through our processes of creation, we artists also spend time imagining futures that don't yet exist, priming the public imagination with an expanded set of possibilities for our shared existence. Artistic experience invites a plurality of interpretations to emerge, contributing to the socialization of experiential knowledge about our collective existence, a fundamental tenet of a democratic society. When artists engage in processes of creation, something comes into existence that didn't exist before. Something new is invented. This process, according to Arts Action Research, is a unique combination of vision, creativity, intuition, and collaboration balanced with craft, technique, accountability, disciplines, and use of time and resources. The artistic process is, without qualification or quantification, the most effective planning, problem-solving, decision-making, relationship-building process available to anyone. Artistic processes are focused primarily on invention rather than innovation, though the two are often confused. According to Julia Kagansky, director of New Inc., the New Museum's Art, Technology, and Design Incubator in New York City, invention prompts us to imagine how things could be, offering new propositions that aren't bound by the reality of how things are. Innovation, however, is about implementation. It is bound to what already exists. It is about optimizing, replicating, and scaling, and it is deeply tied to organizing principles of efficiency, growth, competition, and maximizing profit. Innovation does not set out to build a new foundation for a new world. It proposes improvements built upon existing structures. So how can we address imperatives of decoloniality, health and well-being, and environmental and social justice using the same tools and processes that created the conditions we find ourselves in to begin with? Audre Lorde said it best: the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Kagansky goes on to say that focusing on innovation in a time of great change and disruption can limit our potential to explore, inviting only incremental change rather than the paradigm shifting change that really opens us up to new possibilities. Innovation, it seems, is a strategy connected to the emergency, while invention is about the revolution. If we want to disrupt and reimagine rather than optimize and improve the current system of cultural production, could we lean into processes focused on bringing something into existence that didn't exist before? In this moment of disruption, can we soften our attachment to production in order to experiment and learn? Can we stop working toward world premieres and openings as though they are an end game where art stops evolving? Can we hit pause on our impulse to innovate and instead steep ourselves for a moment in the chaotic realm of artistic creation? Artists are already experimenting with new ways of doing things. We are inviting new rituals, practicing new ways of collaborating, testing new rhythms, and investigating new organizing principles. These experiments are happening in studios and rehearsal halls, living rooms, and parks, all in service to culture change. Artistic processes are not always or often optimizable and repeatable because they are so relational and conditional. However, this makes them particularly relevant as catalysts for transformational change in a highly complex, transitioning world. As artists know, every creation is unique, embedded in a unique set of relationships and circumstances. To navigate the unknown terrain of making art, artists often form communities where mutual support, learning, dialogue, exchange, and a sharing of resources occurs. From this initially chaotic, unstructured space, new insights emerge. This is heartening because to transition to a new world, we need a new how, an ontology that is aligned with our reclaimed understanding that we are relational beings that belong to and are part of a larger natural planetary system. Unlike a strategy, model, or framework, an ontology is connected to the nature of how our reality is organized. Said differently, it is a way of being expressed through culture. It is a set of values and principles enacted in a multiplicity of ways. Unsurprisingly, multiplicity, this available abundance of perspectives, collides head-on with our conditioned Western ways of knowing. But if we continue to pursue the singular objective truths promised by Western Enlightenment thinking, we will miss the plethora of possible pathways to a new world. Making this shift is particularly challenging because it requires that we disrupt the way that we've conceived of our reality. Even in spite of notable counter-narratives within, truths in the plural remain antithetical to the Western project at large. However, it is fundamental to a cultural democracy that the world we all belong to be authored through diverse expressions of the human experience. Part 4, from emergency to emergence, detaching from the current system to build the next one. We are addicted to the highway because that's all modernity can offer us. We need to become fugitives. Bio Akomolafe. Our challenge as artists will be to become fugitives of this system of cultural production we are all embedded in. We will need to examine the habits of being we've adopted to survive in the old system, resisting conditioned tendencies that no longer serve us. Our near impossible task is to balance our competitive pursuit of scarce resources with the work of collective advancement. We need to work together to create a new vision for a world that doesn't yet exist. It is not enough to agree on all the ways the system is broken, creating harm and producing all the same outcomes it was designed for. If we want to do the work of transformation, we need to stop trying to win in a game designed to make sure most of us lose. This is, after all, how the system keeps so many of us artists under control and on the periphery. Instead, we must direct at least some of our scarce emotional, spiritual, and creative resources toward a collective horizon. And we need to do this together across a spectrum of power and privilege. To dismantle the oppressive design of the current system, we artists need to soften our grip on the imperative of production, shift our relationship to time, and deepen our engagement in creative processes capable of remaking our world. Doesn't that sound wonderful? We need to experiment with processes of creation that center new values and then contribute our learning into a collective body of knowledge. We need to first get lost in the chaos of not knowing, creating the conditions for a new system's design to emerge. By insisting on space for creative experimentation and discovery, we can challenge the norms of the old world and disentangle ourselves from the concepts embedded in the current system. This is what we need to do to heal from the harms of an old world and expand into new possibilities. We can turn away from notions of artistic excellence and instead imagine new ways of understanding how art creates meaning in our lives. We can challenge concepts of explicit value, public impact, and evaluation when we engage with ways of knowing and meaning making beyond what is measurable. We can mitigate the damaging effects of unrestrained extraction, progress, and growth by committing to the work of reconnection and reclamation, imagining a sustainable world. We can challenge the logic of hierarchical power and dominance that holds the old system in place by continuing to engage equitably across differences as an essential condition of a healthy creative environment and therefore a healthy ecosystem. We can tell a new story about the essential role of the arts in society. This is revolutionary work, and it's already underway. This work is not unprecedented. Throughout human history, there are examples of countercultures, organized resistance, and mobilization in times of crisis. We as artists need to claim a place of greater agency because the world needs us right now. Only then we will have the opportunity to set our terms. Governments and funders are actively deploying resources right now with a consciousness that the world of tomorrow needs to be different from the world of today. The mistake our system of cultural production keeps making over and over in this emergency is excluding a focus on radical experimentation with art-making practices as a lever for systems change. Artists are languishing. All of us working in the system of cultural production, funders, producers, policymakers, artists, presenters, researchers, educators, donors, we need to ask, what interventions can we make that will radically mobilize artists to do their most important work? Where within the system could these interventions most effectively disrupt the status quo and seed change? One possibility is that various actors across the system of cultural production could direct more programs and resources toward experimentation and discovery over production and distribution. What could we learn if we took the time to understand how artists are working and what they are discovering, rather than simply what they are making and how successful it is in the cultural marketplace? And what could these lessons offer society at large as we all grapple with the existential challenges of our time? Another unexplored opportunity is to leverage the advantages of the arm's-length funding model in Canada that allows for the distribution of funds to individual artists and informal structures, groups, collectives, and networks, unconstrained by the more formally and colonially structured charitable not-for-profit model. The structures of the old world are the disabling constraint of the emergent ways of the new. We need to limit funding that amplifies and perpetuates old world models and instead prioritize and grow pools of funding for supporting process-based research and experimentation uncoupled from the ultimate goals of production and distribution so that we can learn. Arts funders can participate in this work by directing internal resources toward better understanding the role and impact of artist-led activities within the ecosystem, analyzing data collected from funding applications that to date remains inert as a catalyst for shared understanding or change. Finally, we need to create a new social support system for artists so they can pursue careers that have a chance of being viable. Having time and space to run the business of our careers is paramount to having one in the first place. Until artists are compensated for their work in a way that adequately supports both the direct and indirect costs of making it, we will continue to endorse a stratified system where only those with economic privileges can be artists. Social support, such as guaranteed basic income, will better enable artists to participate equitably as engaged citizens in the important conversations about how our sector and our society is organized. This is how we invest in a cultural democracy, learning from the ways that artists are experimenting with organizing themselves, their practices, and the cultures they create as they work together in a context of growing plurality is my hopeful proposal for bringing to light new insights that can help guide us into a post-pandemic world. From these artist-led discoveries, the foundations of a new system with new policies and new practices grounded in values of care, creative possibility, social justice, interdependence, and sustainability will emerge. Thank you. Okay, woo, made it through. So I'd love to suggest we just take a brief pause. Let's take 5 minutes. So it's 3:28 right now. We'll come back at 3:33, and then I will introduce our amazing group of artists who will share some initial thoughts, and then we'll move into a conversation. So back at 3:33. Thanks. So I'd like to invite Yvette Nolan first to introduce herself.
Ani Kwekwe, Yvette Nadizhnikaz, Kitaganzi Binondanjba. Hi, my name is Yvette Nolan. My people are from Kitaganzi B. Algonquin First Nation in Quebec, but I am here in Saskatoon, Treaty 6 territory, Cree territory. So I am a guest here along with the Nakota, the Lakota, and of course, homeland of the Métis, as we like to say. I am I know Shannon from way back. We've actually done shows together back when we were children, before all of this policy nonsense. I put on this shirt today. It's the Nantuck brothers, and across the top it says justice. The Nantuck brothers were hanged in 1899 in the Yukon for murdering some miners. They were following their cultural teachings because the miners had inadvertently killed some of their people with poison, the poison they were using to plunder the earth. The justice system of Canada landed on them. Leonard Linklater, who is an Indigenous playwright in the Yukon, wrote a play about them called Justice, which was produced in the Yukon, and then it was presented at Northern Scenes at the National Arts Centre in 2013. 2013 was in the middle of the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, 2 years before it released its report, 7 years before the murder of George Floyd, and the racial reckoning that catalyzed. I didn't choose this shirt today. I didn't even really know that I had put it on until I was starting to sit down to think about what we were going to be talking about. But it kind of, it connects all of those things for me. It connects the role of the artist in the change in the world, the role of the artist in making sense out of the chaos, the role of the artist, the role of the story in telling us who we are, and in not just us, but us, all of the people who share this land that we currently agree to call Canada. The stories that we tell are how we are how we know ourselves. I just had a big, long conversation with someone about the Wild West and what that narrative is and whether that is even true or not. Anyway, that is me. I am glad to be here, just lending here in the middle of all of these words. So miigwech, Shannon, for inviting me, and Saskatchewan Arts Alliance.
Well, thank you for saying yes. I'm really so honored that you're a part of this conversation. I'd like to invite Erica Violet Lee, who I have really just met through the process of this event, and I feel like we're going to be friends. So, Erica.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Shannon. It's so great to be on this panel with you and reflect on your writing, on your beautiful essay. Yeah, when I first read this essay, when I was asked by the Sask Arts Alliance to go over it, I thought, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I've been thinking about, and it's serendipitous. And well, maybe not. Maybe it's just the fact that we're all poor artists and exhausted and living with the particularities of being in a pandemic, being in a crisis as artists, people who are so often supposed to take in the world and interpret it. At least that's sort of what I see my job as an artist as. But at the same time, as I'm an artist or a writer, I am always first an organizer or an activist because I'm Native, because I'm a woman, because I'm queer, because I'm poor, because I'm sick. And I think that we need to talk more about the intersections of these things for artists when we're advocating for each other, when we're talking about what it would look like for us to have a space where we can actually spend our time creating art and doing what we love to do, doing what we are meant to do, where it's not so precarious constantly. I remember hearing Shannon for the first time cite that statistic about how actually CERB was one of the periods of least scarcity for a lot of artists. And definitely for me, that was the case. And yeah, I read an article about Finland earlier, and Finland has like this interesting new housing program that I don't know how long it's been in effect, but basically people who are houseless are given a house, given an apartment, given the supports they need to be successful. And that's it. Like, it's that easy. And it's actually that easy to solve these problems like poverty and lack of supports for people with disability or sickness. Yeah, it's like, to me, it's that easy, right? But at the same time, it's not so easy when you think of all of the like politicians and governance structures that we have to go through, literally just to get any kind of funding. I am checking my email every single day, hoping that my first ever Canada Council application goes through, and I'm like, oh my God, are they really going to wait until the last day of February? This is like the end of February is when results are announced. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the end of February. I want to know if I'm going to be able to like eat next year. So yeah, just I'm so glad that Shannon is bringing us this provocation, because I think we need to talk more often and explicitly about politics as artists, because what we do is political always.
Yeah, thanks, Erica. Can I turn it to Kris Alvarez to make an introduction? Welcome, Kris.
Thank you. Hi, Erica. Hi, Yvette. Thanks for starting it off and making me already run in my mind. I'm running to the horizon of all of what you just both shared. And so this is an introduction I'm supposed to do, right? I'm Kris, yeah, I'm here. Coming out of a 2-hour workshop just before this, online. Coming from Artesian on 13th Avenue here in Pile of Bones, Regina. Because 20 minutes before my workshop, the power went out in Heritage area where I live. So I quickly made my way here, and thankfully the person who runs this building, Dana, let me in and let me have the lounge to live in and work in for 4 hours today. So that's where I'm calling from. I'm also calling from my heart, which extends to the island of Cebu, where I was born, and extends into the prairies and the rolling hills of here. I come from a long line of badass matriarchs, some that I've met here and some that are part of my family. Today I come to you somewhat nervous because it's a big room of faces and not faces, and because it's a big, big, big topic that feels like forever in a day, because I'm nervous, and so I take, a few drops of rescue remedy before we started here. And I smudged before I left my house, but I feel a little more grounded now as I wiggle my toes and see Yvette and Erica's faces. I often feel the term, well, it's part of duality, but it's another word. Manuela, my friend, once said it, contradicted. I feel often contradicted in my living and existing in this world because I'm this brown kid, immigrant kid who feels really white in some places, really brown in other places. And so I come to you with that actually quite at the forefront of my heart, because this statement or this question of why we need artists now, it fills me with excitement that this conversation is happening now, but it also fills me with frustration, the question, because it reminded me for some reason of the question I've heard before of why is it so important for immigrants to be here? And I guess I have an aversion sometimes to that. I want to flip the bird to that, because I think, why do I have to explain that? But here we are. And so I say that very respectfully, and knowing that this is important to share. But I feel that kind of push and pull of why don't we already all know that? Like really know that? Why don't we all, and I don't mean us in the room right now, actually, I mean the people who hold most power and privilege and money. And so I'm coming from that place. And I'm hoping to come into this conversation in a kind, respectful way, with the comfortableness, with the assistance of my rescue remedy and smudge, to speak any truth that I feel free to speak. So thank you for having me. Salamat po. And I'm looking forward to the rest of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Kris. I'd like to invite everyone, it's an invitation, not a requirement, if you'd like to turn on your cameras, so we can feel a little bit closer together. Again, it's not a big deal if you're not sort of in a space where that is easy or possible. But just want to invite that because I know this, for me as an embodiment practitioner, I find the Zoom world sometimes a difficult space. It's like a place that can accessibly bridge, time and space, but also one that keeps us all a little bit disembodied. So I have some questions to begin, but I also want to say that if you have questions already and you want to put them in the chat or ask them live, feel free to use the little hand raise icon. I'll do my best to really keep my eyes on that and or use the chat, because ultimately I want this to be a conversation that is valuable and relevant for all of you here. So one of the themes that I thought I would start on, and many of, Yvette, Kris, and Erica, you've already sort of touched on this a bit, but this question of precarity. And I wonder if we could start with just this question of like, how are you doing right now, and how are you witnessing or experiencing the condition of precarity in your kind of immediate world right now?
I guess I'll start. I am lucky in many ways. I've been, since I left Native Earth in 2011, I've been a freelance artist again. But I have a partner who has a gig, and that is one of the things that we need if we're going to be artists, apparently. But also, I'm at a very different place. Okay, so I'm a very, very different place in my career, closer to the end than the beginning. And so have been working all of this time. And the third sort of factor in that is I've been waiting my whole life for this moment that we're in, the change moment. I've been yelling. I've been angry. I've been acting, and some would say acting out, for much of my career as an Indigenous artist in this country, as a woman, at like all of the things, right? For all of my life, waiting for this moment. And then when the moment happened, the pandemic, both the pandemics, first the coronavirus, and then the racial reckoning that was initiated by, the murder of George Floyd, had been building, but suddenly the world popped open, and I was like, oh, this is the change moment. This is the moment we can make change. And the other thing that happened in that moment is we suddenly became very popular. People of color, Indigenous people who've been, lots of us doing all of this work all along, but just not being seen and not being heard. And then the moment happened, and suddenly I've been very popular. So it has been a very busy pandemic for me. I've also been at school working on my master's in public policy about governance in theaters, and that has also made me popular. So there's a bunch of reasons why I am a very popular person right now. And I am feeling the need to take the opportunities while the window is open, because I don't think the window is going to be open for long. As you noted in your essay, Shannon, people are like, everyone's going to want to return to that old model, right? And we can't actually go back to that model. We can't just change, what did you say? Change the identities without changing the architecture, something like that. Redistribute the power based on identity without changing the architecture. Well, I'm totally into changing the architecture right now. So I am blessed in some ways by being I was so I didn't have to apply for CERB. That's how well I was doing. But all of my artist friends that I know were doing better on CERB than they had been doing as indie artists. And I totally appreciate that. So I'm aware, but I'm a half-breed. So I sit on both those sides all the time. I can see both sides all the time. That is me.
Yeah, the change moment. It is something that, in the essay, I don't say explicitly, but that does feel like there is a window or a door that is going to close. When is that coming? And what have we done? What can we do? What are we doing from whatever position that we find ourselves in this sort of strange moment where the social contract is being reorganized, right? Kris, can I turn to you next, and just to talk about this question of how are you doing first? How are you doing? And a bit on precarity.
Sure. Thank you, Shannon. Right now, I'm so, as I said, in the artesian, because the power was out of my house, and I feel so grateful. And it reminds me once again of how I can't do this alone. There's always other humans involved. I'm so connected to so many people. And that is why I'm here right now on this panel, is because of that. And I'll echo what Yvette said in terms of feeling popular or asked to be here, actually. You know, I have been lucky during pandemia to work the whole time. And it is partly because of my identity and my practice, because I feel organizations coming to me and saying, we're supposed to do this X, Y, and Z thing with BIPOC people. And you know a lot of them because you make relationships and have for the last decade. Can you help us? And I said it to like another brown friend, artist, the other day, that I feel like, yeah, the meter's running and I'm in this taxi, and so when people come to me and say, you're really busy, Kris, like you're really all over, and I say, yeah, well, the meter's running and I better do it now. And that's partly pandemic related, it's partly life related, because who knows where I'll be or how long I live on this earth. God willing, I hope I'm here for a while. But I do feel that urgency, and I felt that urgency before the pandemic. So to echo again with Yvette, I felt the urgency of making better relationships myself with other brown people and other people who are othered, and have done that inventory a while ago. And so I'm lucky that I have made and built a practice based on not enough money, time, and space. And so when it came to pandemic, that was the same for me. Still not enough time, money, and space. I literally come to you from a week just to give you a glance, because I thought about this today. I know Shannon's going to ask how I'm doing right now. So here's a glance, like a week at a glance in my day planner. Last Friday, I did my show Burnt Sienna to 45 people at the Artesian with masks on, distanced, showing their vax passports. The next day I was with Jolie Big Eagle and Brenda Dubois to work on a community art project for the Dunlop, where they're asking us, what does community look like? We're supposed to get that done in a month. I'm just kidding. It's really lovely and well supported, but you know, it's a big topic. Then I spent Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday working on this new project with senior citizen immigrants who are creating a show with me, a play. Again, needs to be finished by mid-March. But that's not happening. I mean, we're taking the time because time is of the essence. But I got to be with these older ones, different groups of them, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, to make it safe in person, sharing food, sharing stories, dancing, crying, laughing. Thursday, I spent my day off, 2 meetings with lovely people like Erin Goodpipe. I got to finally have a coffee with. I haven't done that. And then I went to an opening of Mookie's, the clown in this neighborhood. Her show was at Globe last night. And then here I am today after doing a 2-hour workshop. So that's my week at a glance. And that's how I feel I need to work right now, because it's urgent to keep making the relationships while the taxi's running. And I say that out loud, and I'm fearful that that comes off whining, and it's not. Let me really be clear about that. And it comes with many questions of critique, like, I'm interested how other brown or othered artists feel right now in terms of the time is nigh and we're doing lots of work, but then I'm seeing white organizations say, gosh, I'm so tired, I can't do anything right now. It creates in me a little bit of a turmoil of like, well, yeah, you can do something too. Like I know lots of people who are doing lots right now. So I'm just naming that because I'm feeling it as I'm saying all this stuff that we're working on. And then I see my colleagues, my comrades at Curtain Raisers feverishly working on yet another application for a grant that's asking over and above the amount of money will be given, an amount of money that never changes. And so I'm coming from that today too. Thanks.
Thank you, Kris. Erica, over to you. How are you doing?
We can switch interpreters to Brandy, please.
I feel burnt out. I I think mostly because I feel sort of similarly to other folks on this panel in terms of like being in demand as a Native artist. I feel lucky for that, but also like aware that it's potentially fleeting, and which makes it feel so urgent to try and like do everything that I can to like secure a career for myself. As like so this is, I think, the second year that I've been a freelance writer and out of school. And like, so basically I recently signed with a literary agent, Stephanie Sinclair, who is amazing and represents a lot of wonderful Indigenous folks. And she's just brilliant, and I'm so excited to be working on my manuscript with her, my first poetry manuscript. And but yeah, in the meantime, I'm doing my manuscript, my poetry manuscript, which is like task number one, needs to get done. And all the rest of the things that I do in my day are piecing together an income, a career, and it's exhausting. I think one of the most frustrating parts of it was trying to do my taxes last year for the first time as a freelancer. And I was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Like, that's like a third of my income that I have to pay back. It's pretty ridiculous. So yeah, definitely getting it professionally done this year. Because I don't have the energy or like the time or the skills to do that. I don't know how people do their own taxes. That's pretty impressive. But yeah, last week I had 3 talks in one day scheduled, and they were all like academic kind of talks. And I was up the whole night before, and I'm like, I can't do 3 talks today. What was I thinking? First off, it's a full moon on top of everything else. And so I canceled 2 of them, which I felt really bad about. But my friend Mito tells me that I should be saying no more and like prioritizing myself, because you can't create art, you can't be a writer, you can't be a dancer, you can't do these things that are deeply embodied if your body is totally like run ragged from just trying to keep up with the daily piecing together of a life under capitalism. So I think that's where I'm at right now. Feeling very grateful for everything, but also like it's a burden to be an artist in this time, because it's our job to be accountable to the communities that hold us up, that created us, that made space for us to have artistic minds in the first place, and try to properly like get justice for our communities given the state of the world. So yeah, it's exhausting. But yeah, at the same time, there's nothing else I would choose to do than be a writer. And I think that's something that's important to think about or talk about, the fact that most of us wouldn't choose another life. Or like don't have the option to really, like I don't know any skilled trades. I'm a writer, I'm a poet.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to pick up a bit on this thread of, so we're in a window of time, right? I mean, and we don't know if this window is going to stay open for a long time, if it's going to close, if it's going to become a door, if it's going to become like a big open wall. And I mean, what I try to make explicit in this essay is that the work of change is not like just happening because of George Floyd. Like there's just a raised consciousness around work that many, many people have been doing for a very, very long time that is suddenly, coming to the fore, being spotlit, and so I wonder about what is happening inside the artistic practices and processes of artists that are the artists like yourselves who are interested in change making work in this social change space. What is happening in those processes that need to become more visible, that need to start coming into the light in conversations about public policy and conversations about systems change that are not just rooted in our studio, let's call it studio practices, but what needs to happen to bring those sensibilities out into the world?
I can say something. You want to say something, Yvette?
No, you go, Kris.
So this is my one small, humble experience of that questioning, Shannon. It's a great question. What I'm noticing in the type of work that I get to do is, I'm resisting saying the word messy because it's in my mind right now, because it's a messy process, but I hate saying messy because I feel like that aesthetic devalues the work. So I'm just going to say that. It's new territory for me in the last decade and a bit of just always adjusting to who else is in the room and what they're bringing, as opposed to, here's the best way I can put it. A long time ago, when I went into a room of young people to create drama, theater, I had a plan, and I went, I'm going to let them be free to choose. And so then I offered this idea of like, we're going to create a show based on this one theme. And in my head, I had preconceived ideas of what would look really fun, cool, interesting. And the kids had complete opposite versions of that. And I could have swayed them into the other version, the one that I was already starting to preload, but I didn't. I had to trust the process of like, what they're bringing is intentionally good, kind, awesome art. And I feel that I grew from that in terms of who I work with all the time. Trust is a big part. And we use this word a lot and we abuse it a lot. And so I'm holding it tenderly right now, the word trust, because it to me means trusting the discomfort that I feel when I have to let go of the reins. And as I've learned from Yvette, taking it from a top heavy kind of structure and bringing it down. And there's a lot of extra work to do that. And it's tiring AF, but it's so worth it. And every time I get to the crux where I go, this is too tiring and hard, I get pushed through that moment, labor through that moment, and out of that is birthed usually magic, which I'm calling magic, but I mean real authentic connection to humans who need to have their voice really amplified in a container that's not colonized by my colonized program brain. So trust is behind the curtain for me of like the room I'm in. And the most slowest turtle of time is also in the room with me that is trying its best to go as fast in the system that we have right now. But so I'm just bringing that up as something I'm fiercely trying to protect, especially with older ones, young people, and people of color or of in terms of class, the people I get to work with.
Hey.
There's so many obstacles to deal with before we get to the room to do the creation. We have to figure out the ride. We have to figure out who's taking care of the baby they're taking care of. Someone needs to be fed. And I want to name those things because they aren't part of the usual creative process that I was trained or learned about long before. I don't know. Does that make sense? Yvette, Erica, feel free to take the question somewhere else or along with that.
I would just love to add one tiny thing that you said that I feel is really resonant with this in this conversation around disrupting like the house that modernity built. So you talk about shifting from the top heavy and moving that weight down. Like, what if we thought about that in an embodied way? Like, where do we place all of our problem solving, our ways of seeing the world, our ways of thinking about the world? Like, what happens when we start to move that down into other places in the body? What do we come to know then? Anyways, I love that image, Kris. Thanks.
Well, it's Yvette. So Yvette, you have anything you want to say about that? That's where I learned it.
Yeah, I think it's, that thing, like I was in a different meeting last night with another organization that was trying to figure out how to, for lack of a better word, decolonize itself, even though I'm like, what does that even mean? What do you mean when you say that word? Because the bones of the structure were built a certain way. And so I think, and I said at that point, I think the large institutions are going to tumble. And someone else on the committee started to laugh at me. And I'm like, what? I always make the prediction. I'm always right, just slightly askew. They call me Cassandra. But it feels to me like the thing that we can do as artists in this moment is the thing that lots of us have been doing all along. And suddenly the spotlight's on us, as in the Zoom call, where we can be visible. But it's also like we know that those things can't sustain in the shape they're in. We've already seen them in the pandemic, just like we've seen them tumble. We've seen them shudder. We've seen them getting ready to fall. And the ones that do not take the opportunity to make those changes, to look at what their structures are, to look at how embedded those structures are in them, they're going to be in trouble. But we, the smaller, the indie artists, artists working in organizations that have been creating themselves in this way instead of this way, and we all know them. And sometimes they started like this, but they have been in the process of tipping over their pyramid and smooshing it into a circle for a number of years. And I could name organizations who've begun to do that transformation for themselves, recognizing, as everyone points out, this didn't just start like with George Floyd, but lots of us have been working towards this moment. And I think that if we can be brave as artists and take our practices and take these things we know into the rooms and not accept the way that things are, like choosing to not go into those rooms that are still just insisting on being this and going, yeah, no, I can't just do it for the money. I have to actually do it for the reason I'm doing it. Like, what is the reason that why would I put my whole life into the service of this, except for the thing that I think I can do, right? Like we as artists, certainly in the theater, we make belief. Like that's what we do. And so we make stories that we then tell everybody and convince them that this can be our story. This can be our story. And so we as artists, what we can do is not squander our stories and our talents and the way we work when we work together like this, when we work in circle, when we ask everybody to be accountable to the thing that we're making. I don't even think I'm making sense anymore. Over to you, Erica.
Yes, Erica, please chime in. And then also after Erica, I'll go over to Kathy in the audience who wanted to share something. So go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, honestly, I think, Yvette, everything you said made so much sense to me. I think that was literally like a good place to leave it. So why don't we just go to Cassandra?
Kathy, would you like to offer something? Please go ahead and unmute.
And if we can switch the interpreter to Sue, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Anna. Oops. I think we just lost people, but anyway. I can't see any of you now, so I'm sorry, but I'm not that techie. So.
We can see you and we can hear you.
Oh, good. Okay. I just wanted to talk about, I'm a painter. I do watercolors mostly. And during the pandemic, I've had the opportunity to learn kind of how to use Zoom and take some programs on Zoom, some art programs. There's a woman that I'm taking a class from right now. She's from Bowen Island out in BC. And her name is Marie Nays, N-E-Y-S. And she's just a fantastic lady. And she has a program that she calls Pay It Forward. So the class I'm taking right now is called Pay It Forward Intro to Acrylics. So the class is free. And what she does about the third class in, she said that her husband and her have been doing this Pay It Forward classes for a couple of years now, because they both feel strongly that everyone should have an opportunity to take arts, no matter what differences there may be in their economic status or racial areas. And so what they did was they pulled together the first box of materials for about 10 students. And yeah, like 3 or 4 years ago. It's valued at about $200. So I signed up for the Pay It Forward. So in the third week, she talks to the students and tells them about the process that she's used. And she said that they only paid for those supplies at the first class. And ever since then, the students that have taken a Pay It Forward class can contribute financially as much money as they feel they can to support the program so it continues going, so that new students can come and have a class for free. So I just thought that that was a really interesting model, particularly in the arts area.
You're gonna get her for that?
And it could, I mean, it could transcend across probably, you know, a vast areas of arts, not just the painting sides of things. But she's very supportive. She's a great instructor. She's very warm and personable, and she just makes you feel so welcome. So, and I just love her. I mean, I've only known her for like 4 weeks, but I've learned so much within 4 weeks from her. It's been great. So it might be something that somebody else might want to look into. And that's like from the bottom up, I would say. So I hope that's helpful contribution.
Thank you, Kathy. It's really great to hear about alternative economic models, especially because I feel like the dominant economic model that we work in is so extractive. It turns our processes into commodities. It puts them in a marketplace, and it doesn't operate with, you know, dynamics of care or mutual aid. And it sounds like this program that you're describing is really trying to experiment with a form of, you know, mutual aid or ways of creating generative economics as opposed to really sort of finite extractive economic models. So I think that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I see a question from Mitchell. Hey, Mitchell. Would you like to read your question, or would you like me to read it?
I could read it. My question was, how do we engage in revolution while living within a capitalist structure that holds captive our means of survival?
Amazing question. Thank you. Who would like to begin?
It's like we're like rock, paper, scissoring under our desks. Hi, Mitchell. Thanks for the soft one. I don't know. I mean, how do we, like, what do we do, right? I mean, it just speaks to Kathy's question, right? About talking about who can afford art and how people pay it forward. We haven't managed to struggle out under it in all of these years. This is the moment when we are all asking these questions. I mean, it was like, this is the magical moment, right? Like we all had CERB, there was like a universal basic income. They told us it couldn't be done. And then the pandemic happened and it was done. Suddenly there was a universal or a targeted basic income, at any rate, a targeted basic income for everybody, which is, of course, the beginning of the end of a bunch of other social problems, poverty, homelessness, even addictions, like all of the things. We could get so much done if we could start like that. How do we engage in a revolution? Well, it's not by driving your truck to Ottawa and parking it in front of the Parliament buildings. That's not the way. It's that hasn't worked for them. It's a bit like, how do we make new governance systems for our theaters? Well, we're stuck, we're hobbled by the legislation at this point. So, but what everybody is doing is creating alternate models. This is actually the way we work. This is actually the way we govern ourselves, which I think we can also do economically in a bunch of ways. This is actually the way we want to work, live, exist. It's not much of a revolution. It's incremental instead of, punctuated equilibrium. But if we're ready for the revolution, then, I keep talking about, like, I just want the lights to go out and everyone to be, I'd be like, sorry to miss your faces, but I don't know how to do it if we don't start over, because the capitalist system is in our bones. It's in our structure. I don't know what the answer is. We make alternate models in our alternate communities, and we engage as little as possible with the capitalist monster. That's so lame. Kris.
Tag me in. So I'm with you on that convoy, Yvette. I'm going to add to it. Here's again, I have a duality in my life, always contradiction. I often in the last years of pandemic have said, burn it all down. And when Yvette says, the bones, I had to write that. Thanks, Yvette. Bones of the structure. I'm like, so do we need to break those bones and reset like you do with your nose or someone does with their, it sounds so painful. And this is the issue with me, that I fear that there are too many people who still benefit from the capitalist system and structures. And I'm not talking about the independent artists at all. I'm talking about, I'm not going to name names. I'm going to say that's the thing. There are people who are still holding on to dear life and we're not ready to let go, like you probably are, Mitchell, like I am. But we have to pay bills, we have to eat. And I respect, Erica was mentioning that earlier, that need. I also want to throw into the convoy that we're creating of revolution, Bell Hooks' quote about the transformative power of love in our society. What is it? Because we need to start believing in that power, the transformative power of it, as opposed to that we thrive in anguish and suffering, or something like that. Sorry, Bell Hooks. And so I throw that in because I do think every time I make a point of having, sorry, I just saw the cat. Every time I have a coffee with someone who doesn't look like me or doesn't come from where I come from, it's transformation. And Kathy, when she brought up that program, what's the one thing I took away that she said? She said, I love that person. And so that's why she's freaking going back to that program, right? So why can't we trust that a bit more? And I mean the organizations and the larger funders and powers that be, to trust that the artists' hearts are out there. And we're transforming through that process of love that creates edgy theater and songs that you want to drive long roads to, and poetry that makes you want to rip your clothes off. That's a shout out to Tennille Campbell. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from. Tagging you in, Erica. You got anything else you'd like to share about how we continue on a revolution?
Yeah, yeah, I think those are great answers. For me, it's I've been thinking about how to not individualize, but make revolution tangible and material in my own life. And so for me, that looks like focusing in on and building a practice of joy in my life. Like really, really devoting myself to figuring out what it is that I want to do, that will benefit my community, that is like what I love to do, instead of constantly feeling like we have to respond and fight every single battle that comes our way. Like, there's this terrible saying that's coming to my mind about, like, if you throw stones at every dog that barks at you, or however it goes, like along your path, you'll never get to the end. Which I need to think of a better saying than that one. But it's just like, we need to sort of disengage from the system as it is built and as it self-replicates, by imagining different ways of living entirely. And I agree that I think that, like, the end of what we know has to occur in order for us to be able to actually have the freedom to live in other ways. So yeah, I believe really strongly in abolition. I think that is a really important part of my practice. And oh my gosh, there's this poem by, so I've only sort of recently started describing myself as a poet. And more often, I guess, or for a longer period in my life, I can myself just an organizer. But with claiming the title of like poet and artist, it has given me so much freedom to like think outside the box, even as an organizer, in my work as an organizer. And there's this poem, basically, the Saskatoon City Council I'm in Saskatoon, I'm in inner city Saskatoon, and the City Council was meeting to vote on the police budget, having another increase to like, and it's already the highest, the category that gets the highest amount of funding, like by far. It's ridiculous. And then right at the very bottom is like housing supports. Of anything that gets like funding, it's like 1% of the total yearly budget of Saskatoon goes towards like housing for people, whereas like 80% goes towards cops. And and no one had filed a request to speak at the city council against this like police budget increase, which like everyone sort of knew was going to go through anyway. And I think we're all just tired of fighting back, right? Like fighting those not little, but what are relatively like the battles that maybe we can't focus on. Like I that's going to be the last time I ever speak at city council. Like that's not my prerogative. But I thought, okay, you know what, I'm going to do something. And so I read a poem that I wrote about like I didn't really intro it. I was just like, put myself on this agenda or got myself put on the agenda very last minute by the coordinator for the city council meetings. Read this poem about abolishing the police. And then someone reached out to me right after and was like, oh, I loved your poem. I'm gonna be on the police board next year. I'd love it if you came and talked to us. And I thought, like, what a waste of my time. Like, no, I'm not gonna talk to a room full of cops about like abolishing the police. Like, that's not my job. And it's a waste of my time. So the way I responded was just to, and like clearly you didn't understand my poem if that's what you're asking me to do, is expend more of my time and energy as like a young Indigenous woman organizer and like artist. If you're asking me to come and respond to that type of violence, when like, I don't know, if I wanted to talk to the cops, I could walk outside right now. There's like 20 of them on the street every day. So I responded with this poem I just found it. It's called Contra la Policia, Against the Police, by Miguel James. It's short, so I'll just read it to you. My entire oeuvre is against the police. And if I write a love poem, it's against the police. And if I sing of the nakedness of bodies, I sing against the police. And if I make this earth a metaphor, I make a metaphor against the police. And if I speak wildly in my poems, I speak against the police. And if I manage to create a poem that it's against the police, I haven't written a single word, a verse, a stanza that isn't against the police. All my prose is against the police. My entire oeuvre, including this poem, my whole oeuvre is against the police. The person never responded back with a follow-up on the invitation. I think finally at that time they kind of understood where I was coming from. But yeah, it just, that's for me, that's like in my mind in terms of what does revolution look like? For me, it's accepting that I can't on my own or with like the organizers in my community be constantly fighting back against some sort of colonial violence, like the cops, or like child welfare policies, or like there's numerous things, housing policies, all these things that would make massive lived differences in our lives if we were to change them. But the fact is that the given structures that we are supposed to go through in order to influence or change them actually exist to uphold what already is there. So we need to be so deliberate and so careful with our time as artists and think like, where am I going to, one, find joy to rejuvenate me and my community, and two, like, what is a waste of my time and what is something that is like I'm going to be talking to a wall, and not waste your poetry there.
Yeah, I mean, all of you are really pointing to this, the dilemma of resistance, right? That we are like kind of all trapped in these structures. And so it's, you know, the acts of resistance mean saying no, means slowing down, doing less. And when we do that, we let go of the rewards that old system offers to us, like recognition, like money, like platforms for our work. And this is the paradox that I think a lot of artists and people in the arts find themselves in. And, you know, I've been wondering about these like systems and structures. Like, I feel most disheartened when we really look at what you're talking about, Erica, at the societal level. Like, the reason that we need housing policy, the reason we need basic income is because our world has created the conditions where people are suffering and need those things because other people are benefiting from that exploitation or from that suffering or from those harms, right? And so we're not in in a world right now that is trying to recalibrate that. It's starting to recognize that. But the arts world, if I can call it its own world, if I can think about the arts as its own, system of cultural production, well, we have processes like that exist inside of those larger social structures, right? And we have, like Yvette is working on, systems of governance that structure our arts organizations. We have arts councils that have resources that are deployed through peer assessment committees. Like, we have mechanisms within our system of cultural production where we might begin to start disentangling. And it's not that it's not easier. Like, these structures themselves are still exist in those larger social structures, like inside the regulation that governs charities and through regulations that govern our tax system and things like that. But I do, and this is partly why my proposal is beginning with literally like the dynamics of collaboration amongst artists and in the ways that we're working with each other. So can we find allyship? Can we find solidarity with other actors in our system of cultural production who might have a better understanding than, say, a police officer at understanding what the hell it is that we're actually doing? And how can that allyship start, like allyship with people in positions of power in our system of cultural production? How can that start to crack those bones that, Kris, you're talking about? Like, how can it start to bring about change? And I feel like we have to do this together. Like, we can't start pitting ourselves against each other through the battles of identity politics. Like, we have to do this together. And I feel like there is a growing solidarity around support for artists to do their work. Like, I hear more and more often targeted basic income. Like, I'm starting to hear some of these mechanisms that will, even as a starting point, bring artists out of a state of extreme marginalization and precarity that will even allow them to participate in some of these collective organizing efforts, aside, like that is work above and beyond the work of just doing our art, right? And I think part of the issue is we don't even have the capacity for that we actually have to put our art away in order to give ourselves time and space to do collective organizing work. And I think it is possible as like some step to start building the capacity of artists to do the work that they're doing. I am mindful that it's 3:36 and we don't have to be done. There is sort of time for like informal socializing conversation. But I just wanted to say, like, if anyone does need to leave, we are going to sort of continue in an informal way. The room's going to be open for another hour. Kris, I saw your hand. I am going to turn it over to you in just a moment. But just to say, we also, please, like, raise your hand, ask questions. We can move into an even more informal mode. And if others want to speak, like if you have comments, experiences that you want to contribute to this conversation, we don't have to only hear from our panelists at this point. We can really move into a more open circle. So Kris, did you want to offer something? I saw your hand was up.
Thanks, Shannon. I just, pandemic mushy brain. I started talking earlier about, what we were talking about, and I just want to, something came up.
Switch into her
Erica mentioned
to Rachel.
Choosing wisely, right, in terms of the work that we take and say yes to, and it brought the word of efficiency in my mind, and how even though this capitalist system that I benefit from right now and have found ways to subversively work through it and connect other artists that I know need support and work and get them work. That's what I do in the system right now. I find my way to massage it to the way that it will help another brown artist I know, or another young artist or small company. But there's a couple of things that are coming to mind that I want to say out loud, Shannon, like, because I'm thinking in small tasks about efficiency. Like, when we do have to write grants and a date for a grant is, you know, like when Em invited me to this panel and we talked a bit about how to support and mobilize artists. I was just coming out of an organizational grant with my comrades at Curtain Raisers. And I was like, yeah, you know what? Like the first thing that comes to mind is January 15th. That date, having to be done something on that date right after the holidays, right in the middle of winter, it feels cruel. I'm not saying that the people who made that date happen are cruel. I'm saying it feels cruel. I can't pull my pants up and get shit done in that time. It's really hard. And then I think about like invoices, you know, like when an organization's asking an indie artist like me to get an invoice to them, and then I have to make sure and coordinate that. There's these little, I keep thinking of the admin tasks that indie artists are doing a lot of, and is there ways that we can change those things, those little shifts at least in the meantime while we're in the capitalist models? Because it's hard to untangle the nest of how do we break the bones and start. Can we slice off a few of those things to make it a little easier? Like, and in this pandemic, you know, this idea where something gets canceled because of the fifth wave, fourth wave, and an artist is told the event that you were contracted for, you're not going to get paid for because we can't do the event. You know, to me, there's a shift there of like, what about the admin team that worked on that event? Are they being told in your office that they're not being paid for this event because people aren't showing up? Or is it just the artist? And so, because I'm speaking from my experiences and experiences I'm hearing from colleagues, you know, around me. And I just wanted to name those things as like, maybe those are ways that we can help be more human to the artist who is trying to mobilize and do good work.
Yeah, Kris, I hear you. And I wonder about this too. I wonder if artists can be supported to actually like identify more of these things and to do that in a way that's supported, you know, like, because I think that I think artists do know, we know there is a lot of low hanging fruit here, like we know. and I feel like there has been a slow erosion of engagement with power over even the smallest things, because there's a feeling that change isn't happening or can't happen. And so I am witnessing the way that like our arts service organization and union and association structures, for example, are highly siloed, and they're struggling to engage with the groups of people that they are meant to represent. And I think that structure itself is creating a problematic vehicle for the voice of artists and workers in the field to voice something as simple as, can you please not put a major grant deadline 2 weeks after the holiday break, because it means I'm going to spend my holiday writing a grant instead of having a holiday, right? It's those things, like there is low hanging fruit. I don't know if there are others who have things like that want to voice them or contribute, or if there's other things that want to be said out there. Please don't be shy. Joanna, are you trying to speak? I can't hear you, but I see maybe that you're trying to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
There you are.
Now I can't hear you. Just a second.
Sorry, just before you start, I'm wondering if, I'm just checking in to see if people would like us to keep the spotlights, or if we should move to like a bigger, what do people think?
Are we okay? Why don't we continue a little longer in the
Sure.
group format for now? Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. I like this low hanging fruit conversation because it takes away some anxiety that I feel. And I was reflecting yesterday while I was grant writing about how some grants I feel replenished when I write them, because I use them and engage them as creative process. And some grants, I just feel so defeated and like, you know, there's something that is being taken. And sometimes it's just about how much capacity I go into grant processes with or something. But I just really love this direction that I'm hearing about like trusting artists and trusting artists' capacity and capacity to self-regulate and capacity to self-determine for sure the creative processes. And I wish, I hope, and I wish for granting processes that also trust that autonomy given to the artist. And so, hey, that means, you know, we've seen like some progress, like, yeah, someone maybe wants to speak their application or someone wants to scale their application, but maybe someone wants someone else to write their application. Maybe someone else doesn't have time to write their application. Maybe someone else just sits down and has a conversation. And there are, I really feel like, I don't want to get distracted by so many possibilities, but there are some really good things, I think, in trusting artists and in trusting artists who are involved in granting processes through peer review that can be really reimagined. And I have no idea how to get in a room and have that conversation with anyone who can make the change. But yeah, my big wish is that we feel replenished by these opportunities to share what we're up to, and that we can write these grants with generosity. There's such huge generosity in the work that we're proposing, and that the funds can be offered with generosity to artists. But I guess it means we all agree that we have great value. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else have some burning thoughts? It's okay if it's a non sequitur, we can go somewhere else if you like. I mean, I would love to know a bit more about how folks are grappling with some of these questions, like either in your own practice or in the particular context that you work in right now. Like, I'm sure there are some people here that work inside organizations and might feel constrained by some of the politics or dynamics therein. How are you navigating some of that stuff for yourself? Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Thanks, Shannon. Yeah, you know, our organization, I'm with the Saskatchewan Association of Theatre Professionals, and it is literally and explicitly in our funding language from government that we exist to be in. I'm quoting a bit, transposing a bit, but you know, an economic engine for theater. That we, you know, it's about commercializing of the art form, and it's right in our language. And so we live in this double world of being beholden to our funder, and at the same time being well aware that what artists need is not for us to be an economic engine for them, but to get out of being an economic and get out of the business of being an economic engine and support their art. So trying to find subversive, you know, ways of doing that, taking money from a government that is all about the dollar. And I liked your, you know, fugitive example of trying to find ways of meeting genuine artistic need and support. And yes, support the sector. Yes, support public awareness of and appreciation for the art, which can sometimes manifest as people paying money to come see your show. But so I don't have any answers. I guess I just put that out there. You know, you mentioned organizations that are living with this question right now, and we are most certainly one of those. And we are, in fact, we're meeting at the end of the month for a big day that will be our first sort of get together since pandemic to say what now. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah,
thanks, Mark. I want to ask a question to people who get to experience being in organizations, like, because I as an indie artist, I feel like, you know, my head's down here looking at the work, and I do. I'm curious to ask if anyone can share in the meetings with higher ups in government. Is the tone friendly? Is that a fair question? I don't know what I'm asking there, except to say, because I know I'm saying out loud, and I have in this past hour, where I'm really giving a criticism or critique to the organizations. And I said white organizations, I meant the whiteness of them in terms of capitalism. But I guess my question is just like the Sask Arts Alliance, for example. You know, when I talked to Em, I was like, you know, thanks for inviting me. I don't have a relationship to this organization. I don't know my place in it, or what is my place. And I hear that organizations like this are there to advocate for us. And so, yeah, I'm curious when the people who have to go into the rooms with those other people that I don't see, what's the tone like? Are they listening? Are they willing to hear the change? I feel like I don't know that climate. Thanks for anyone who wants to answer that.
Em, I see you've got your hand up. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, please. Let me just lower my hand. So yeah, I've just been, I don't know, I'm feeling really like emotional about a lot of the conversation that's happened here today, because a lot of it does resonate with me really deeply. I come to this role at the Arts Alliance as an artist, but as an artist who feels like I haven't had the chance to fully do what I want to do as an artist since I graduated from art school. So I think, and that's, you know, and it's just, so I guess what I'm trying, yeah, I am excited about this role at the Arts Alliance. And the reason that I wanted to come into this role is because I want to try and figure out how we can take some of these conversations that we're having here at this level to other places, so that we can be heard and that we can try and make some of this change. And I really, really like the idea of trying to address some of this low-hanging fruit. I mean, Kris, even when you said invoices, it immediately triggered for me, well, like, we can do that so much differently, you know, and it's just something that it's easy to change anyway. But I think I haven't been in this role for very long, 4 months, and I haven't had, you know, too many conversations with, you know, let's say some of the higher ups, but I have. And I think that I think that they're listening, and I think that there's the possibility. I think my approach will be to go in as authentically as possible, to have these conversations, and to try to relay what it is like on the other side of the grant application, or the, you know, that sort of thing. Because I think that there's a really big disconnect there sometimes between, let's say, the funding agency or the governmental agency and the person on the other end. And, you know, I guess some of you know me, some of you don't. And I just want to let you know that, like, my door, my phone line, my Zoom line is always open, and I want to keep having these conversations. And I want to know, we want to bring forward what's important to the arts community. So please use the SAA. We are an advocacy organization. We're a research organization. Let's figure out how we can do this work together. We have a good history of this, and I want to mobilize things. So yeah, sorry if that took a bunch of time, but.
Thanks. I mean, having also run an arts service organization in my history, I really feel this dilemma that you know, the efforts of the organization are often only as good as the engagement of the community that you aim to support. And so there's a lot of dynamics and factors and influences and forces that inform that engagement. But just to like send you some love and a vote of confidence as you like embark on this position, Em, because it's needed. It's needed a lot right now. And also to acknowledge that we artists at times put our arts careers on a side burner or on a back burner to do this kind of organizing work. And, you know, I feel immense gratitude when artists do that, because I feel like they're amazing bridges to really understanding what artists do, how artists work, and that you know, you're putting yourself in the position of that bridge to try to then speak those experiences out to people who make decisions about our shared existence. So thanks for doing that, Em. And you know, we support you. Anyone else want to share an organizational experience, or we could go in another direction too. It's almost 5 o'clock in Toronto, so I feel like that starts to shift me into a less formal mode.
I'll just tell
And
what
if we
I've
can
turned
switch the interpreter to Brandy, please.
turn my camera on. It's Belinda Harrow, and I'm here wearing, as usual, 2 hats. My Sask Arts hat, I work with the collections, but I'm also an artist, and today's a studio non-work day for me, so I'm in my studio. But what I can say is that you know, we're so embedded, the arts workers and artists, that's I think a positive thing. You hear, you know, don't hesitate to, I think Sask Arts is listening. We're talking about all these issues. That's one of the reasons I'm here. That's one of the reasons we've been doing this work ourselves. So it's the benefit of having artists, that kind of gray line between artists and arts administrators and arts workers, is there is a lot of communication back and forth. But yeah, it's a challenge, especially as an artist, to be able to have my artist hat on and be free to be an artist while doing this other work as well. It's certainly a challenge, and this talk's been great. It makes me sad in so many ways, and it also makes me feel hopeful at the same time, especially on you know, the last few weeks, what we've been going through, even more so, even today. I don't know if anyone's been listening to the news. It's pretty grim, but yeah, so thank you so much, Em and Arts Alliance, for putting this on.
Thanks, Belinda. Ken, I see your hand is up. Hi.
Hi. I just have, I guess, a couple of random thoughts. I work with the Associated Designers of Canada. So we do a lot of national work, and you know, there are a couple of, I guess, interesting things. Like, we have less anecdotal evidence, I suppose, of some of the difficulties. Like, we know that there's 80% less income for designers across the country over the past 2 years. So since 2019, 80% less. But we also know that all of the theater companies who have been filing their returns recently, or filing their finances, are carrying surpluses, and that's a difficult thing, I think, for us to consider. We also know in some of our advocacy work that Saskatchewan is such a, like, it's a bit of a hole right now, in that it doesn't, when the CRB was ended and everything looked like we were emerging from this pandemic, and then it turns out we weren't. We were going back into lockdown. The federal government tried to sort of squeeze arts workers into the worker lockdown benefit program, which wasn't really designed for arts workers and wasn't really meant to replace the CRB, but that's the way that they tried to do it. But of course, here there was no lockdown, and so arts workers here didn't qualify. We existed in this kind of hole in which there was no support because the federal government really didn't bend over backwards to try and amend that gap. And of course, the provincial government, I think, was less than interested in doing anything about it as well. So, you know, those are, I suppose, random thoughts that maybe don't necessarily add up to anything, but from an advocacy point of view, it's been a frustrating time for sure, for sure.
I just wanted to take a quick moment to respond to that, just because we did attempt to do something to address the gap that was left when Saskatchewan didn't have a lockdown benefit. I contacted the folks that I know at the ministry, who I must say, as someone who's never done kind of government relations or talking with government very much, they're very receptive. So we talked to them and talked to them about the position that artists were being put in, and other workers in this case. And, you know, of course, we still haven't even gotten a response. So it's too little too late. So it's kind of figuring out how we need to mobilize to get a more effective response, I guess. But just wanted to let you know that we did try to start the conversation, and they did pass it along to folks at the national level at Canadian Heritage, but as we all can see, it didn't go anywhere.
I mean, one thing I find really heartening and somewhat unique about the Saskatchewan arts community, if I may say this, is that I feel like there's a willingness to work across disciplines more, and perhaps it is out of the necessity of the size of the community or the way that communities are really dispersed around the province. But I feel like, you know, even when you look at the cultural policy history of Canada, Saskatchewan was the first for a lot of things, even ahead of the federal government. And I wonder if there is something to be pursued in the Saskatchewan context around even working like across industries, you know, around this question of guaranteed basic income is an example of where there, you know, other labor unions, there are lots of, you know, other kinds of workers that experience precarity and that have gig work like artists. I mean, I know that this is some of the conversation that's happening elsewhere, but I do find that there is something special about the nature of how Saskatchewan organizes in community that could actually make Saskatchewan like be able to take a lead in some of these things. So just to say that, I've always really admired that dynamic because I find it extremely frustrating in Ontario. There's so many people in so many different communities, and I feel like we're all working all over the place and not as well together as we could. So yeah. Yeah, any other issues that are coming up? Like, I don't know, is guaranteed basic income something that you are talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, well, even before I started at the Arts Alliance, it was identified as an advocacy priority for the SAA. I believe that's correct, Daniel. You can step in if I'm over speaking, but it's definitely something that we advocate for.
Sorry, I just realized I had my mic up. Em speaks correctly. Universal basic income or targeted income or basic income for artists has been one of our advocacy priorities for several years now. Obviously, there's still lots of work to do, but that really sort of validates me. I want to say when I hear about the need for that, you know, that we've been working on that. Obviously, we haven't been successful, but our efforts are hopefully going to where they're needed in that respect. So. Thank you all.
Yvette, I'm wondering if I could point to you for a moment to share a bit more around the work you're doing on governance structures, because this is another multi-jurisdictional area, I think, right? So like, you know, organizations can incorporate nationally, but they can also incorporate provincially. And are there ways, I mean, I just would love to know more about sort of the insights that you have at this moment, but is that another place where advocacy efforts can be directed?
It's such a good question. I mean, we're still hobbled by legislation. So what everyone is doing is creating models that run beside the model that they have to do, which is the incorporation model, whether you're incorporated federally or provincially, societies, or whatever it is. But people are recognizing that this is not, that it, the one size fits all model fits no one. It's a no, one size fits no one. And so what organizations are doing, what groups of artists are doing, is choosing what their governance, how they want to govern themselves, to whom they want to be accountable, how they will be accountable. And they're creating kind of parallel governance models and reducing this thing that they have to do to minimally checkboxing. It's ironic. After all of these years of us being checkboxes, now we're like pointing towards just checkboxing those things. Part of it is, for me, it's like being ready for the change, because I think that this, and it's interesting, Jessie Wente was in this room for a while, who is the chair of the Canada Council of the Arts. And so that is interesting to me. You're right. If we can get the councils, the funders to change the rules, then we will start to free it up. And certainly that's happening at different funders at different levels. And this is all part of the tumbling down of the institution, as far as I'm concerned, because the new organizations that are coming up are like, we don't want to incorporate because we don't want to get into that capitalist colonial model. This is how we're going to do it. And they can do a certain amount of work with the funders as ad hoc groups or as groups that name themselves without incorporating. There's still things you can't do. You can't get a charitable tax number, but maybe you can partner up with someone who does have a charitable tax number. You can't, there's a number of things you cannot do without incorporating, but there's a lot that you can do. And this is where I get into economies of scale again, because if the smaller orgs and the newer orgs are like, we're just going to work outside the system, and the system that includes the funders is we are going to make it easier for you to get money from us without doing those things, then that's the thin edge of the wedge, right? That's the way. So pretty soon more and more groups are like, we are not going to incorporate. This is how we govern ourselves. This is how we're accountable. These are the things we have to do. We have to do an audit. We have to pay our taxes. Like, these are the things we still do. We have to do T4s or T5s or whatever it is we do. We do those things. That's the accountability. And we're accountable to our community, identified as such. For me, it's about being ready for when the thing finally crumbles, when that thing is no longer needed, if it's going to happen. And I didn't think it was ever going to happen, but I'm now more hopeful because of so many people who are like, yeah, we don't want to work that way anymore. It's hard, right? There is a bit of a cognitive dissonance about like, this is how we actually work, but this is what we actually have to do. And it's hard for me emotionally because it feels like lying, and that's against my values. But I know lots of groups that are doing it and are able to reconcile those things. And we'll be ready in the event that we don't have to do it. That's not very hopeful, I know, except for the groups that are coming up who are like, don't want to get involved in all that stuff, going to find another way to do it.
I mean, I think that you're so right. And this is like something I'm really interested in is this question of like, what are arts councils actually able to do? And I feel like one of the things that really lit a fire for me was during the pandemic, when these ancillary programs kept coming out, but they were only available to organizations. And I just thought, I thought about these alternative structures, these other ways of working, where groups of artists who are working outside of that formal not-for-profit tax structure can and are able and equipped to do the kind of work that organizations were being subsidized through additional measures to take on. and artists were told to just go through the regular programs. We'll put more money in the regular programs, but there was no money in those ancillary spaces to develop other kinds of capacities.
I do want to just point out something, which is like, it's hard to just throw everyone in the same bucket. Like during the pandemic, when those additional monies were being sent out willy-nilly to organizations that were on operating funding or whatever, I got checks from Raven Spirit Dance in Vancouver because I was one of their artists over a period of time, work I had done before, work I was coming into doing. They were just like, they were like, we got a bunch of money from the government for emergency, and we're disseminating it to the artists that work with us. They just sent us checks, and it was like, holy cow, wow. So there is something about who you choose to work with, right? Like if we are more careful about who we work with, if we choose to work in a certain way with certain groups, Raven Spirit Dance is an Indigenous dance company, dance theater company in Vancouver. I'm in a relationship with them. Michelle Olson has been my choreographer on many occasions in many rooms. There's a relationship, but I wasn't the only artist in Raven Spirit who got money. All the artists who have a relationship with them in the past couple of years got money when they just moved that money through the organization to the artists, because they also know that the artists were not getting money. The organizations were getting money.
Like that is something I would love to know. Like, was that money followed? And how many organizations did what Raven Spirit did? It's a question. I mean, maybe some of them did, but I am curious about like how that unfolded, because I think it's an assumption in our system that what's good for arts organizations is good for artists. And I'm not convinced that that's always true, right?
Yeah. And I think really, I think because especially everyone's still in a transactional headspace, I think a lot of the organizations got these influxes of money, and then they reached out to artists and went, we're going to do a panel, we're going to do a workshop, we're going to, like, it became a transaction. We got this extra money, so we're going to give you some money, but this is what you need to do for us. Raven Spirit is the only one that I know of, and it's my personal experience, that just sent me money. You're a Raven Spirit artist, and we're sharing the money we got.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know how relevant it is, but I had an interesting experience at the time that the pandemic happened, because it was a moment in my career where I had like a glut of contracts. Like, it had never happened before, where I had contracts with two major institutions, one as a dancer, one as an assistant director. And then I was also working, like, as I do on an ongoing basis, with a collective of artists who were co-creating work and, working more on the margins and with different types of practices. And then I had my own work that had just premiered, and that I had, like, potential for touring engagements, right? Like, what is that even anymore? But what was interesting is that the way the cards fell is that they fell from largest to smallest. So the very first contract that was canceled was the largest institution. They only paid what was required by equity. Next contract, show canceled until further notice. And then it took like a year before they decided not bringing that show back into our season. The collective didn't have resources to pay, but they created a kind of weekly check-in for the artists to see how we were doing until they received some funding that allowed us to then be paid to come and talk to each other once a week as we started to figure out how we were going to, move again. And then my own work, this is like in this space of like, what is available in terms of emergency support for artists? Well, my only options are to go through the regular channels of creation and production, and those channels are difficult. They're difficult because the success rates remain very, very low. So there's really no emergency support. And I don't know, like, that's just my personal experience. And I realize that experience comes from a particular stage of career, a particular discipline, a particular social location, like all of those things. But there was in my mind a kind of like interesting correlation to the way that the biggest institutions were the first to abandon the artists. Like that was my specific experience that I had, which also motivated me to think about some of these questions, right? Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Are there others who want to share experiences about, yeah, Ken, go ahead.
Well, the other thing that I think is just sort of interesting in this moment is that currently there are large groups of art institutions, either in the musician sector, I believe it's also happening in the theater sector, that are actually trying to put in applications for the CPowerF, the Canadian Performing Arts Workers Relief Fund, so that they can be the ones to distribute the relief money as like some of these larger organizations. And, you know, I think we should all struggle with that a little bit because, well, I don't want to speak too much from my own bias, so I will leave it at that. But I find that, you know, I find that difficult because I think the experience that you had, Shannon, that you were talking about a lot of these larger organizations they followed the letter of the contract, and that was it. But I do think it's also true that the smaller the companies got, the more generous they were with the money that they received. And that's not universally true. There were some large companies that worked really hard to make sure that people who worked for them on a regular basis stayed employed, or they found ways to keep getting money to people. But generally speaking, it's concerning that they would be applying to offer relief to people that they have not offered any relief to.
Yeah, it's curious. And when I saw the way that was
interpreter.
When I saw the way that was structured, I worried about the precarity of the dance organizations that would need to like the dance associations that run on like part-time contract staff, and how on earth that they would gather themselves together and, you know, ask the questions out to the community, what do you need, and put together a proposal that's due like what, in 2 weeks. I'm really concerned, and I don't know, like, I don't know if they're even going to be able to do it. Like, if we might be in a scenario where dance artists can't access that relief fund because our sector didn't have the capacity to organize itself fast enough to, you know, to get it together, or that they put in an application that doesn't really reflect very well the needs of the sector because they don't know. I mean, I do worry about that. I don't know how it is in other disciplines, but also like it feels like a very fractured process to me, you know, like I don't quite understand the thinking behind this particular resource deployment, but it gives no agency to the artist at all. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Are there other things? I mean, we don't have to continue until 5:30, like, or 4:30. Sorry, we can call it a day. And I feel like there's been lots of great points made. Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Sorry, I tried to retract my hand because I thought maybe the moment had passed.
Go for it.
I just by way of update, I've just been in on some of these conversations that have been happening as these applications are coming together around the Performing Arts Workers Resilience Fund. And yeah, as it stands, I'm aware of 3 major applications that are trying to cover off artists. One is from the Canadian Live Music Association that will be a coast-to-coast application asking for money to distribute directly to musicians, musical artists in the term of short-term relief. This would be probably a one-time payout. Here you go for temporary help. The Actors Fund of Canada is also putting together a similar application that in theory will be available to anyone in the entertainment industry from coast to coast. They just have to put in an application. And then our organization is also involved with PACT and a number of theater ASOs across the country, and another group application that will ask for the same thing. Two caveats being that it be regionally disseminated, so that prairies, there's a package for the prairies artists, there's a package for maritime artists, so that the great industrial centers don't swallow it all up. And also some kind of process that prioritizes equity seeking artists as well. So the devil, of course, is in those details. And I think it's a small step in that it's not money that's being filtered through some kind of employment or training or mentorship program. You know, it is at least directly here. There's no strings attached. Use this however you need to use it, which is what we and others have been fighting for as a small step in what we hope is the right direction. But of course, we don't know, you know, hopefully these applications will be successful because they are purporting to represent a great, you know, a great number of artists. And I share your worry a bit, Shannon. I'm not sure where the dance community is going to fall in between all this, because there is not a strong collective representative body right now. And we're trying to figure out a way that dance artists can apply to one of these funds. But anyway, for what that's worth, I just want to put the word out so folks can stay tuned for any calls that come out soon, opening up these funds and opening up the application processes. And hopefully they're flexible enough and kind enough that anyone can access them, despite various levels of ability, capacity, and so on. But that's what I know right now, for what it's worth. Thanks, Shannon.
Yeah, thanks so much. So many things, so many issues to talk about right now on the advocacy front. But it's really been a joy to spend the afternoon with all of you, and ahead of a long weekend at that. So I want to say a really big thank you to Yvette and Erica and Kris for your comments, lending your voice and experience, and to Em and Daniel and Belinda and Jessica at the Saskatchewan Arts Alliance. Thank you so much. I have certainly found this conversation really meaningful and heartening. And you know, hope we can continue to find solidarity as we try to change the systems that we are embedded in. It's no easy task, but glad to know that there's so much great work that has been happening and continues to happen. So Em, I'll pass it over to you to close. Thanks.
Thank you. Just echoing all of the thanks. I think the conversations that we've had here today have been really heartening for me. I think you know, it gives me a good understanding, I think, of some of the directions that we need to take, and to have more of these conversations, you know, and figuring out how we can mobilize them. I want to take a minute and say thank you so much to Saskatchewan Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services for providing the interpretation services. It's no small feat, I'm sure, to interpret for 3 hours, so thank you very much. Thank you to Shannon for, you know, writing the thought piece that initially sparked, you know, our engagement and interest in this conversation. Thank you to Kris and Yvette and Erica. And thank you to everybody, Jessica, Daniel, for being involved, and for all the folks who stayed on this long to have this conversation. I appreciate you all with all my heart, and I wish you a really, really great long weekend.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.